everybody agrees that this incident is a tragedy for the Velasquez family, and especially. Mr. Worley walked you through a bunch of legal words about Dallas County and on a certain day and all that, right, which is from the indictment. You said, yes, I did cause Octavio Velasquez's death. Was it your conscious desire or objective to cause his death?
No, sir.
Did that thought ever enter your mind?
No, sir.
Were you aware in that split second as everything was happening that whatever act you were doing was going to cause his death?
No, sir.
Or a substantial likelihood to cause his death?
No, sir.
Jordy, is there anything else that I haven't asked you that it's important for this jury to hear?
If Tabito was here right now, I would tell him that I'm sorry. And I miss him, and I'd do anything to bring him back. And I'm really sorry to his family.
I have no further questions.
Any recross?
Mr. Estrada, the whole reason you had that gun out in that parking lot that morning was because you were angry when you grabbed that gun and you went out to use that gun, didn't you?
I didn't want to. I used it. I didn't want to.
You were angry when you grabbed that gun, weren't you?
Yes, sir.
And you were angry at Jocelyn and you were angry at Tabito, weren't you?
Yes, sir.
And you took that gun out of that closet and you took it outside and you used it, didn't you?
Yes, sir.
I'll pass witness.
Nothing further, Judge.
May this witness be excused.
No objection.
No objection.
All right, Mr. Estrada, please watch your step getting down. You can have a seat. Next to your attorney. All right, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I need to send you back into the jury room. We have to take up some business outside your presence, but, so I need you all to take a 30-minute break. Please remember your instructions.
All rise.
Three copies of the second
You may be seated. All right. Call your next witness.
Judge, at this time, the defense will call Santiago Moya. Santiago Moya. For now.
Sir, if you would please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. You may be seated.
That's fine, yeah, go ahead.
This witness has been in the courtroom during the trial.
Yes, he's an expert, and I let the state know from the beginning that I was calling him as an expert, and they've had no objection.
Yes, ma'am. We're aware.
Okay, thank you. You may proceed.
Thank you, Judge. Mr. Moya, can you please state your name and spell it for the court reporter?
My name is Santiago Moya, S-A-N-T-I-A-G-O, Moya, M-O-Y-A.
And you, what do you do for a living currently?
I'm a private investigator and a firearms instructor.
I'm sorry.
And a firearms instructor
How long have you been a private investigator?
since 2019, 5 years now.
And how long have you been a firearms instructor?
Since 2002.
And is that continuously since 2002 to the current date?
Yes.
prior to your work as a private investigator, how were you employed prior to 2019?
I was employed as an FBI special agent
And what period of time were you with the FBI as a special agent?
from September of 1996 until March of 2019.
And you just said special agent. Was that your only role or designation at the FBI?
Well, as a special agent, I was an investigator. In addition to that, I was a firearms instructor.
So part of the time that you've been a firearms instructor, you were a firearms instructor for the FBI.
That's correct.
Okay, I want to back up. Tell us about your education. Where did you receive your undergraduate education?
Charleston Southern University in Charleston, South Carolina, with a degree in business and a minor in computer science.
And graduated in?
Graduated in 1993.
And then let's talk about your training and experience at the FBI. When you go to the FBI, walk us through what the training to become a special agent is.
So it's about approximately 4.5 months of training at the academy, and that entails legal training, firearms training, defensive tactics, ethics training, general investigations.
And so once you complete that at the FBI Academy, and is that at Quantico, Virginia?
That is in Quantico, Virginia.
So all, soon-to-be special agents go to Quantico for their initial training,
Yes,
and you did that.
correct.
And you talked about, amongst the various things that you learned there, firearms training. What sorts of firearms training do you receive as a special agent in particular?
Well, obviously safety, marksmanship, shoot and no shoot type scenarios. That's for the most part.
And then you talked about becoming a firearms instructor. What sorts of additional training, if any, would you have received to become a firearms instructor for the FBI?
Yeah, to become a firearms instructor, you have to pass a test at the field office. Obviously, those who want to be instructors already have an interest in being instructors. You've already have a lot of interest in firearms. So after you pass that test, you go to either Quantico or another designated field office where they're running these trainings. And that goes for approximately a week. And after you pass another final test, then you become a firearms instructor.
So if someone has interest to become a firearms instructor and they want to take that initial test, that initial kind of threshold to move forward, you already have to have more than the average special agent's interest in and experience with firearms. Is that fair?
Yes.
Before you go to the FBI, what sorts of firearms experience and training had you had prior to that?
Prior to go to the FBI, I've been involved in firearms for many years. I enjoyed shooting guns, so I had experience with a number of rifles, shotguns, pistols, revolvers.
As a private citizen?
As a private citizen, yes.
And then you go to the FBI and you have interest, so you take the test?
Correct.
And I assumed you passed it.
Yes.
And then you said that they send you to a field office, either Quantico or a field office. Where did you go?
When I took it, it was in Houston. So you go there for a week, you go through teaching techniques, safety, always safety, marksmanship, how to teach, how to treat remedial students, those who are not passing the test. There are some agents that will have some problems with the guns, how to break the guns down, how to clean them, how to maintain them. All that in a week. And then there is and obviously during that time there's a lot of shooting. And then the very last day you take a shooting test. And if you pass it, it is not an easy test. And when you pass it, then you get your certificate.
And you talked about, other than safety and all the various things that you mentioned, specifically breaking down the gun and cleaning
when you mentioned breaking down, are you receiving education and training specifically on the way different guns work, the mechanisms for instance, you know, when we've been talking about racking a gun, how the chamber is ejected, how the next round from the magazine is pulled up, and all of that, the inner workings, I guess, more than the average person of, I know when I pull the trigger, it goes off.
Yes,
Okay. And is that a substantial part of that training, to be able to understand and explain to your special agents how the gun works?
it is a part of it. And also in order to diagnose some of the problems that they may encounter, misfires, again, jamming, it does help to know why. But when you get the gun and you're trying to help.
So I assume you pass the test
Yes,
and you become a firearms instructor.
yes,
Where are you assigned by the
Dallas.
FBI?
Dallas Division.
To the Dallas Division, okay. So what years were you with the Dallas Division as a special agent and a firearms
As a
instructor?
special agent since December of 2000 until I retired in 2019, March of 2019. And as a firearms instructor, it was 2002 until I retired.
And so with your time with the FBI, you mentioned, you know, so firearms instructor is not all the work you do. You're also being an investigative agent working on cases like the other special agents, is that right?
Correct. I was assigned to a drug squad, and I worked the Mexican drug cartels and violent crimes.
But specifically about your firearms instructor work, what sorts of things are you training on and doing with the special agents? How does that training process work?
After you go back to the field office, basically it's on-the-job training. So we have 4 qualifications per year. And during those 4 qualifications, we would qualify approximately between 200 and 250 agents 4 times a year. And those qualifications, each session, would go for about 2 weeks. So it becomes on-the-job training. There's a main firearms instructor, that's all he does. He doesn't work any cases, he's not assigned to any squads. The rest of us were working cases, but at the same time assisting during those 2 weeks, 4 times a year, with the agents that needed to be qualified, those who needed remedial training, obviously cleaning weapons and everything else related to it.
So approximately 250 special agents in the Dallas Division, 4 times a year you're working with. So approximately 1,000 people are being trained, you know, 250 people 4 times, being trained a year.
Well, it's gonna be 1,000 iterations.
Right, of the same group.
Yes, of the same people, yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I could not understand what you just said.
It would be 1,000 iterations of
Iterations, yes, okay.
of the same people.
So 250 people,
So they're-
4 times.
I'm sorry, they're requalifying.
They're requalifying, so they're requalify, yes, 4 times a year.
Thank you.
I know I speak with an accent, so
That's right.
bear with me.
You speak very quickly.
Yeah, just slow down a little bit, I think it'll help.
Yes, sir.
Make sure everyone understands. And then are you, as part of your continuing education to stay as a firearms instructor, are you also receiving additional training moving forward?
Yes, every 5 years, we go back to Quantico for, to get re-qualified. Well, we still qualify 4 times a year at the field office. But then, every 5 years, we get re-qualified as instructors. So we go back to Quantico, and then we get another week of new weapons, new ammo, new techniques, whatever that may be.
So you're being qualified 4 times a year for the 20-ish years you're in the FBI, and every 5 years you're being re-qualified and retrained on being a firearms
I'll be
instructor.
the firearms instructor, yes.
So a lot of experience with a lot of different firearms.
With the FBI guns, yes.
And so your experience is not just with one gun. I guess you're dealing with a number of different types of weapons?
Yes, initially when I started with the FBI, we were equipped with 6-hour pistols. Later on, we moved to Glocks, so I do have experience with those. In the meantime, we also had some leftover Smith & Wesson pistols. I happened to like those at the time, so I was trained also with those, with the Smith & Wessons. We also had the same shotguns. We had MP5 submachine guns and AR-15s.
And so you're familiar with all those various types of weapons,
Yes,
and I guess more than familiar, you're a firearms instructor, you're an expert in all those types of
I
weapons.
qualify other agents with all of them.
And each of those weapons has slightly different kind of mechanisms that they work. I assume they're all a pistol is a pistol is a pistol to some degree, but then there are differences amongst them that you have to learn and be able to explain to your agents.
Yes, that's correct.
And then you mentioned you retired from the FBI in 2019.
Yes,
After working with the FBI, did you continue to work as a firearms instructor?
yes.
In what capacities and for whom?
So after I left the FBI, I was recertified by TCO, Texas Commission on Law Enforcement. They deal with a lot of the training for police officers and peace officers. So I'm not a peace officer in Texas, but even though I had my credentials as FBI and I had the firearms instructor credentials, they actually gave me a TCO and they gave me a TCO certification for firearms instructor and police instructor.
And you carry that currently.
Yes,
And then also, have you trained like security guards as well?
so in addition to that, I'm also DPS certified to train security guards, armed security guards, and a license to carry instructor also.
So the license to carry instructor, so that would be, so now we've stepped down from law enforcement adjacent security personnel, and now we're talking regular civilians.
Yes,
And so, and is that something that you've given one time, many times?
many times.
How many law enforcement officers of any stripe would you say that you have given training to on firearm safety and working mechanism and all the various things?
Well, law enforcement, obviously, including the FBI, thousands.
And how many non-law enforcement regular civilians would you say you've given the same types of training to?
Obviously, that would include the security guards because they are civilians, handlers.
And then, other than your decades of experience in law enforcement and your certifications federally and state and all of that, do you keep current on the literature on safety using firearms?
Yes,
Does that include issues like we've been talking about today, or throughout this trial, about involuntary discharge, unintentional discharge, accidental discharge?
yes,
Is that included part and parcel with the training that you received as an FBI agent and all throughout?
yes.
And then are you familiar with the various scientific studies commissioned by law enforcement, Department of Justice, et cetera, on the causes of involuntary discharge?
Yes,
Is that something that you studied in your capacity as a firearms instructor and in your capacity as a firearms expert?
yes.
Have you testified in a court before about firearms
Yes,
as an expert?
no,
But you have all of these certifications and qualifications over decades, correct?
over 25 years, yes.
the testimony that you're gonna give about firearms, firearm safety, and the issues underlying involuntary discharge, is that based on your knowledge, skill, experience, and training as a firearms instructor?
Yes,
Are you also using your technological and specialized knowledge of firearms to help the jury, the trier of fact, understand the evidence in this case?
yes.
Offer Mr. Moya as an expert at this point. I don't know if the state wants to ask questions, but obviously I pass them at this point if they do.
Any cross-examination?
Yes, ma'am, thank you. Okay, what should I call you? Mr. Special Investigator, Special Agent? I could say retired Special Agent, but we'll go with retired.
Santiago will be great, but if you want.
I'll go with Mr.
formal,
Moya.
Mr. Moya will be fine.
All right, Mr. Moya, can you tell me what you plan on testifying about today?
There are responses that there are responses to noises, there are responses to losing your balance, there are responses to what's called sympathetic muscle responses of the body that will cause a person who's holding a gun and a finger on the trigger to actually discharge that gun. There's a number of studies that have been going on since the early 90s that address somebody with a finger on the trigger.
Okay, and can you give me some examples?
The factors that we're going to be
Yes,
talking
yes,
about. So one of the factors is a startle reaction. When the person is startled, they tend to close their hands. And if you have a handgun in your hand, you have the finger on the trigger, then that gun may go off. Police officers who are trained to keep the finger off the trigger don't always do that. And there are studies to that effect. Approximately 20% of those who were studied during different scenarios actually had their finger on the trigger, even though they've been taught for years not to do that. The other one would be loss of balance. Losing your balance will also cause you to close your hands. And there's several examples of police officers actually getting in. Actually, I have seen that. Somebody tripping and falling and actually discharging the weapon. When you fall, when you trip, when you lose your balance, you tend to close your fists also. If you're holding a gun with your finger on the trigger, when that happens, you're falling forward, you're falling backwards, you may discharge that gun. And the other one is sympathetic motions of your muscles. A lot of times, when one hand is moving one way, the other one is moving in a sympathetic motion. It's also called mirroring. The other one will mirror the other one's movements. A good example of this was a police officer who was trying to search somebody, and at the same time, she had a gun in the other hand, and while she was grabbing and grasping with his hand, the gun went off. And that's the third factor that I'm going to be talking about.
Okay. And you mentioned studies. Can you tell me what studies you consulted?
Yes, I have a number of studies here.
I think you have your own, too.
Yeah, that's fine. One of the studies that was done by the Department of Justice, as you know, every federal agency has to report every shooting to the Department of Justice. In the years from 2000 to 2003, FBI, DEA, ATF, U.S. Marshals, they had 267 shootings of all types. Out of those 267 shootings, 102 of those shootings were unintentional. 14 of them took place during law enforcement operations. 88 of them took place while they were cleaning guns. That's a very high number. And these were trained police officers, not civilians. That's one of them. There's also a study of a German, it was actually done in Germany, where they took 34 police officers and they were put through 12 to 13 different case scenarios, high stress type scenarios. Out of those officers, and oh, by the way, they were given a gun that was fitted with sensors, okay? And after they were done with the 12 to 13 high stress scenarios, out of the 34 officers, 20% actually had put the finger on the trigger, even though they're not supposed to, they put the finger on the trigger. A parallel study of the same officers actually found out that 20% also had pressed the trigger with enough force to discharge a weapon. And there were two studies to that effect. One was in Germany, the other one was here in the United States. They got the same results.
Okay. And are those the two studies?
Those are the two main studies to that effect.
Were those the only ones you consulted, or were
No,
there others?
there are other studies also done by a number of people.
And what were those studies? Have you read all of these
I
studies?
have read all of them.
Okay, what are some of the other ones?
Okay, here's one by Applied, so I got one here by Applied Ergonomics.
And who was the test subjects in that?
Okay, this one was, I'll tell you in just a second. Okay, this study was based on studies by a professor in Oka out of the University of Colorado. Okay, and he's the one that started back in the 90s with all these studies. This study here is based on Dr. Inoka's studies. It's by Applied Ergonomics.
Okay, and is that also one that
That
deals with
also-
police officers?
Yes, and it also comes to the same three conclusions.
Okay.
Okay?
Are any of the studies that you consulted, do any of them deal with civilians, or do they all deal with police officers and law enforcement in general?
The ones that I've consulted here, most if not all are police officers, trained police officers.
Do you have any, are there any studies about civilians and their use of firearms?
I haven't seen here any regarding civilians.
Police
Those I can tell you out of my, I'm sorry.
No, please, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Those I can tell you out of my own experience,
Okay,
having dealt with so many civilians.
okay,
And fingering the trigger is, I'm gonna say at least half of them that I had in every class would put their finger on the trigger.
okay. And if you put your finger on the trigger, you might pull it, right?
If you put your finger on the trigger, you may, yes, you may.
And, okay, so, fair to say that in general, police officers, and law enforcement in general, they have, they use guns, far more often than the average civilian.
That's probably true. I
I
would say
mean,
yes.
do you still carry a firearm
Yes, I
in
do.
your work?
Yes,
And how often do you carry that?
every day,
Every day?
yes,
And you carry it everywhere you go, pretty much?
pretty much, yes.
And the same thing, I think Detective Sarah mentioned that he has a gun on him all the time. He had one, you probably can't carry it in court.
I can't carry any problem, but
But
it's in
we've
truck.
seen police officers that do, because police officers can basically carry their gun anywhere except inside a correctional facility, right?
yes,
So when you talk about these numbers of accidental shootings, you mentioned that a great number of those occurred during cleanings.
a lot of them happen during cleaning, yes.
Okay, so that would be a different situation from actually being faced with another person that you end up shooting, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And fair to say that police officers have many more opportunities to have to pull a gun when dealing with another person than the average citizen does.
Yes,
Okay, and so these studies are within regards to those situations, right?
These tests are in regards to those situations with trained police officers. My point here is that if this happens to trained police officers, imagine what happens to somebody with no training.
But you don't have any data to support that.
Not out of these studies, that's from personal knowledge.
Okay. And then, in terms of this particular case, are you here to, or do you intend to offer any testimony about whether or not the defendant intentionally pulled the trigger or whether it was an accident?
I wasn't there when this happened, so I don't know what happened. What I do know is that there are some possibilities of different things happening, and one of them is that if Jordy fell, if Jordy lost his balance, if Jordy was startled, he could very well have discharged that weapon without intending to discharge that weapon.
Okay, so basically the crux of your testimony will be that Jordy Estrada could have accidentally pulled the trigger.
Yes.
Okay. I'll pass it on.
Judge, if I could just add on a little bit, and also I forgot I have all his various certifications and all that, so I'll enter them in as defense exhibits for record purposes at this point. Okay, Mr. Moya, Mr. Worley was just asking you about the studies primarily or all being on police officers.
Yes.
Are the studies clear about the involuntary muscle contractions that occur when someone loses their balance? So you said that when someone starts to lose their balance, the scientific community is clear, there's a clear consensus in published studies and journal after journal that you've referenced, where when someone loses their balance, they tend to have a muscle contraction that is completely involuntary, and that is in their hands and to an extent in their legs as well.
Yes.
Okay. So, although the studies apply, the subjects of the studies have been police officers, are the authors of all these various studies clear about whether those involuntary muscle contractions are somehow unique to police officers, or are these common amongst all humans, whether you are a non-professional, non-law enforcement officer or a law enforcement officer?
These are common to all humans. They're not especially for police officers. We're all humans. We all react the same way.
Okay. So these are studies based on the most available subjects who use firearms as part of their profession. It's not that it doesn't apply to civilians.
Correct.
Okay. And you were saying that a lot of these studies, like for instance, were commissioned by the Department of Justice. There's various, I think, police journals,
Yes.
as well as scientific journals like Applied Ergonomics, etc. So they are going after this problem because it is a problem within the law enforcement community especially.
It is a problem, yes.
Okay. Because they have so much more access and use of firearms.
Yes.
So we talked about the loss of balance issue. Does the same apply to a non-law enforcement person, that the involuntary muscle contraction that occurs when someone is startled, whether they are a police officer or not a police officer, does that also apply equally to civilians?
Absolutely.
And are the studies and the scientific literature clear that that applies equally to civilians as non-civilians?
It applies the same.
And the sympathetic, same thing.
Same thing.
And then in your vast training and experience and specialized skill working with non-law enforcement civilians, have you seen all of these factors in practice with people having these involuntary muscle contractions for the startle, sympathetic, and loss of balance reasons?
Yes, I have seen them.
have you personally observed involuntary discharge of a firearm?
Yes,
By law enforcement?
yes,
By civilians?
yes,
Have you personally observed law enforcement officers place their finger on the trigger or inside the trigger guard without realizing it or stating that they didn't?
yes,
Have you personally observed civilians do the same?
yes, a lot.
Even more so?
Even
Okay.
more so.
Have you personally observed people who have received training on firearms still do these things that we're talking about?
Many times,
Have you personally observed people who have not received that training
many times,
have the same
the
problems?
same problem.
And all of this and your testimony is in line with the broad consensus within the scientific community.
Yes,
You said starting with a professor from Colorado, in Oka,
you know that.
and then there have been, I think you said, multiple studies by other scientists based on his, confirming it over and over and over again.
Yes,
And then the specific application of your testimony in this case would be to describe what we've talked about involuntary muscle contractions and how they can happen the various three ways,
yes,
and how those apply to real-world situations for people holding a firearm,
yes,
and how those could apply in the scenario as described by Mr. Estrada.
yes.
You're not here to tell the jury what exactly happened,
No, I'm not.
the same way the state's experts aren't.
Correct.
Okay. You're here to tell the jury that what Mr. Estrada has described lines up with the scientific literature and is a possibility
It is a possibility.
that the jury can consider.
Yes,
Do you feel that your testimony would assist the trier of fact in understanding a complicated and highly technical field?
yes, I think you are.
Mr. Howell? No. Well, go ahead. You can approach it.
Okay.
Take your time, wherever.
I'm showing you a document that I will be labeling Defense Exhibit 1 for record purposes. Do you recognize that document?
Yes, I do.
What is that?
It's my resume, CV.
And does that describe your training experience and various professional roles as we've discussed in this testimony?
It's summarized there, yes.
I'm showing you what I'm marking as Defense Exhibit 2 for record purposes. Do you recognize that?
Yes, it's my TCO firearms instructor certification.
Bless you. I'm showing you what I've marked as Defense Exhibit 3 for record purposes. Do you recognize that?
Yes, my TCO police instructor certification.
I'm showing you what I've marked as Defense Exhibit 4 for record purposes. Do you recognize that?
Yes, my licensed to carry instructor certificate.
From the Department of Public Safety
Yes,
of Texas.
yes,
I'm showing you what I've marked as Defense Exhibit 5. Do you recognize that?
yes, that's a copy of my retired credentials from the FBI.
Okay. I'm showing you what I am marking as Defense Exhibit 6. Do you
Yes.
recognize that?
Yes, I was also a hostage negotiator. That's my certificate from the FBI.
And what I've marked as Defense Exhibit 7 for record purposes, do you recognize that?
Yes, it's my personal protection certificate. from OGS.
What is OGS?
It's Outwatch Global Services. It's a company that provides training for, lack of a better word, for bodyguards, but it's just personal security.
So, dealing with all the same kind of issues we've been talking about?
Yes.
And what I've marked as Defense Exhibit 8, you recognize that?
Yes, this was an FBI firearms certificate, firearms instructor.
And 9,
This is going to be my hostage negotiator certificate.
from the FBI.
Yes, sir.
And 10,
That's firearms instructor school, also from the FBI.
and 11.
Yes, this one is my M4 AR-15 instructor school for crisis resolution trainings consultant. It was provided by the FBI.
And this last one is interviews and interrogations.
Yes.
Doesn't really apply to this, so I
It does
won't
not
use
apply to this.
that. So is it fair to say you've received a number of trainings on the subject of firearms in many different capacities by many different agencies, both law enforcement, federal, state, and civilian-based?
Yes, I have.
No objection, Judge. I'm sorry, you not.
Yeah, I hadn't yet. Offering for record purposes at this point.
No objection.
All right, defense exhibits 1 through 11.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, defense exhibits 1 through 11, this witness's CV and certifications are admitted for record purposes only. May I see them?
Yes, I'm sorry, Judge. Of course.
That's all right. Thank you.
Yes, Your Honor. Yeah, see, Judge? Okay, thank you. Okay, so to summarize.
Mr. Howard?
Yes.
we're not like other jurisdictions, our tradition is to sit while asking questions. Thank you. You may proceed.
Thank you, Judge. So to hone in on your testimony, okay, what your anticipated testimony if the court qualifies you. You're here to explain the science behind involuntary discharge, right?
Yes,
To assist the trier of fact in understanding that issue.
yes,
Okay. And the well-documented ways it can happen.
yes.
Are you here to tell the jury that Jordi Estrada involuntarily discharged a weapon for any sort of certainty?
I'm here to tell the jury that he could have very well have done so.
And will you be giving an expert opinion on the ultimate issue in the case of his guilt or not guiltiness?
No,
I guess I'd pass the witness back to Mr. Gray.
Mr. Moya, okay, so a couple more things here. You indicated that the data that you have on these involuntary reactions, that it would be the same if applied to civilians as if applied to law enforcement. Is that what you testified to?
I think he would be, given the fact that we're all human.
Okay.
The physical reactions would be the same.
All right, but I just want to be clear, that's your assumption, but there isn't actually any data to support that.
Given my training and experience, that's what I believe.
But there's no data to support it.
I don't have any data here with me.
Okay. And that's simply because those studies have not been done, correct?
I don't know.
Okay, all right. Have you testified about involuntary reactions with firearms before?
No, I have not.
And have you done any independent studies on the involuntary reactions while handling firearms?
Independent studies, no, other
Okay.
than my personal observations, experience when I'm in the range.
Okay. Now, when you talk about you talked about being startled, you talked about falling, and you talked about the sympathetic reaction, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. But do you know what percentage of the time people have that sympathetic or that falling reaction or that startled reaction?
I don't know the percentage of times. It was approximately 20% of the subjects actually were startled enough or lost balance enough or had that sympathetic reaction enough to press the trigger.
Okay, so
If they were holding a gun, about 20%.
So about 20% of them did that.
Yes,
They did one of those three.
correct.
But we don't know how, if they were to do that over and over again, we don't know how many times any one of them would do it. Is that right?
Correct. These studies, they run the subjects one time per study.
Okay.
Then they run it over and over. No,
So-
they do not.
It's not that every time a person falls, they pull the trigger.
Correct.
It's not that every time a person gets startled, they pull the trigger.
No, what it means that is that if they have their finger on the trigger, they may fall, they may lose their balance, they may get startled, and they may press the trigger. When police officers with training were run through scenarios, high-stress scenarios, 20% of them put their finger on the trigger or fire with enough force, or pressed with enough force to discharge a weapon.
Okay, so it's not even the 20% pulled with enough force to fire the weapon. 20% of them put their finger on the trigger.
So there were two parallel studies, okay? One of them showed 20% where they put the finger on the trigger, and the other one was 20.4% where they actually applied enough pressure on the
Okay.
trigger.
Two different studies?
Yes.
Okay. But in the end, the testimony is, it's possible to accidentally pull a trigger.
It is possible to accidentally pull the trigger, yes.
Okay, I'll pass the witness.
Anything further?
Just to be clear, those two studies that Mr. Worley was asking you about pressing versus enough force on the trigger. Thank you. Thank you. One of them, is my understanding from reading that study is that one of them had just a pressure sensor and one of them had a pounds per square inch sensor. So like the first one, they understand, oh, people are pressing the trigger even though they don't think so, which confirmed the hypothesis. Is that right?
Yes, every single police officer was asked if they had pulled the trigger, and every single one of them said, no, I did not. But yet, the sensors in the pistol show that 20% had actually put their finger on the trigger.
And then as is common in the scientific community, more scientists come back and say, let's see if we can replicate that, and let's ask the additional question of, are they just touching it, or are they actually putting enough pressure, the 5.5 or whatever it is on the trigger pull weight, to actually discharge? And in those scenarios, they then confirmed it from 20% and then 20.4%.
It was 20.4%, 5.5 pounds comes from many of the striker fire pistols these days will have it takes so much pressure to discharge the weapon. Typically between 4 and 8 pounds, it varies. 5.5 is a good number, it's a general number. If you buy, for example, any Glock pistol that many police officers carry, it's 5.5 pounds of pressure that it will take to discharge the weapon.
At this point, I'm going to offer Mr. Moya, under the Texas Rules of Evidence, 702 through 705. I believe he has demonstrated a great amount of knowledge, skill, experience, and training and education. I think that will assist the jury in understanding the scientific and technical specialized knowledge that he's trying to explain. The fact that, quote, everybody knows that if you lose your balance, you could pull the trigger, doesn't mean that having someone explain that, yes, that science is valid, would be beneficial to assist the trier of fact in understanding that specialized knowledge.
Judge, I don't think that this particular testimony is, I think it's potentially more confusing to the jury than anything. I think that in the end, the testimony just says that it's possible that a person can accidentally discharge a firearm. And I don't believe that is really been contested or at issue here. I think in this particular case, the question is that what happened or not? Not could it happen? And so I feel like it would be potentially, like I said, confusing to the jury rather than helpful to them understanding the issues that are before them. Because they are not ultimately going to be deciding whether it's possible. They're going to be deciding whether or not it happened. And I feel like putting on this kind of testimony kind of skews what they need to be looking at as the ultimate issue. And there's already been testimony from one of the state's witnesses that it's possible to accidentally discharge a firearm if your finger's on the trigger.
Retired Special Agent Boyd. The German study and the main two studies that you've been talking about where they, with the police officers and whether they put their finger on the trigger, the 20%. What year were those studies done?
Those were done in the early 2000s.
And are those still widely accepted by the scientific community
Yes, ma'am.
and the firearms community rather? said that two other opinions are losing your balance causes a person to close their fists.
Yes.
What studies are you relying on that tells you this, besides your anecdotal experiences over the last 20 years?
Yes, ma'am. The same studies. All these studies came up with the same results. It was,
How many studies?
all the studies that I have here, I've got at least 8 different studies, 8 different opinions, 8 different journals based on the scientific studies.
Well, which journals? We need to get into specifics, please.
Sure. So I have studies by applied ergonomics, 2 different studies.
What is applied ergonomics?
It's a journal that deals with ergonomics. And
What is
in this case,
ergonomics?
muscle movements. So I have those 2. Accident analysis and prevention is another one.
From what, that's a journal?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that for law enforcement or just in general?
This is general. Some of these journals are written by some of the investigators that conducted these studies. Okay. So the risk of involuntary firearms discharge also. This one was written by 2 of the same investigators that conducted the German studies. Towards an understanding of involuntary firearms discharges, this is another one. It's also by the same individuals. It's a different paper.
Are there any other scientists or experts in ballistics conducting this kind of research?
Well, we do have the writings of this professor Inoka in Colorado State, and then we have Christopher Hine and Dietmar Schmidt-Bleicher. They're also researchers who have written several of these papers. This one is also by the same 2 individuals. A lot of them are follow-up investigations. Catherine,
They conducted, each of these 8 that you have, in their journals, they conducted studies regarding losing balance.
they conducted studies, yes, these are the individuals that actually conducted the study that involved the 34 police officers in Germany,
Okay.
are those 2 individuals that I just mentioned. We have this other one is by Catherine Barber and David Hemingway. It's also in regards to accident analysis and prevention.
But does that refer to how losing, I'm talking specifically about how losing your balance causes you to close your fist?
Pretty much every single one of them comes up with the same 3 results. Startle reaction, when you lose your balance,
Okay.
and the other one would be your sympathetic motions.
How the hands specifically mirror each other?
How they mirror each other, yes.
Okay. How many, and all 8 studies talk about these 3?
They come up with the same 3 conclusions, yes, ma'am.
Okay. And these 8 that you have, they're accepted in the firearms investigation and ballistics community?
I'm assuming so. I don't know who else have read this or who else have used this in court. These are studies that I have found while I was researching the studies for this case.
So you don't know if they're widely accepted in the scientific community where this is studied?
I don't have personal knowledge of it,
Okay.
but obviously, Your Honor, they're written by individuals who have conducted these investigations for a long time, and they're all based on the same studies.
Are these accepted in, have you discussed these with other firearms
Yes,
investigators?
yes.
Or, I'm sorry, instructors?
Yes, Your Honor. And these are
How many?
these are results that we have been seeing since I've been an instructor. So have I specifically gone to somebody to say, look at this study? No, the results of losing balance, the struggle, those are things that look out for as
Are
instructors.
these three, the startle, losing balance, sympathetic movement, are these three findings widely accepted in the firearms instructor community?
The results are,
Those three results?
yes, ma'am.
That can result in an accidental discharge?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and you know that how?
From my experience, all three happen when we're at the range. I have seen all of them happen.
I understand you've seen them, but have you discussed them or with other instructors and, or is it just something that's so widely accepted that it's just known?
It is widely accepted, Your Honor. Think about the sympathetic one. Every police officer, they know better than to be searching somebody with a gun in their hand.
Well, they're supposed to.
They're supposed to, correct. So these are things that, is it discussed? Yes. Is it trained? Yes.
Okay.
Perhaps not in the context of this article, but it is something that police officers train to do.
And that's what you train people to do.
Yes, ma'am.
And do other instructors that you are known or aware of, do they train people and FBI agents on the same three theories regarding accidental discharge?
It's not a specific training, but it is, as far as, let me go back to the sympathetic training. We're taught not to holster the weapon before we cancel somebody and search him because the gun could go off by accident. So we're not citing this, but we're training for it. The same with loss of balance. Loss of balance, we all know that if you trip, there is a chance that your gun may go off. So that's where finger of the trigger,
Okay.
comes from. I mean, it's general training that we've been doing for years.
So what I hear you saying is that it's widely accepted, and these are just some of the scientific tests and journals that have written about these three widely accepted causes of accidental discharge.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, all right. Have my questions prompted any other questions from the defense?
Just one, Judge.
You may.
In your,
Sit down, please. Thank you.
in your lead up to this testimony, did you speak to multiple firearms instructors about these three causes of involuntary or accidental discharge and the studies?
I've spoken with at least 2 other instructors.
And were they in agreement about the widely accepted nature of these three?
Yes.
And I just want to be clear, there are not 8 studies, there's 2 studies, right? And then you have a bunch of articles written about the data that was collected from those 2 studies.
Three studies, yes. 3 studies, and the rest are articles and experiments based on the results of those studies.
Okay, and when you say that 20% of the people exhibited that they fired or they either touched or fired the weapon, that those were any one of the 3 of the sympathetic or the startle or the falling?
Those were the 3 factors that all of them came up with.
Okay, So do we know how many out of that 20% are from people following?
Take your time.
Give me 1 second. There is give me 1 second.
Sure, go ahead.
Yes. Loss of balance, that was 9.4%. Use of the other hand, 7%.
So the sympathetic was 7%.
Yes.
So then that leaves us with being startled at about, what, 10 point, I'm sorry. That's
So we had
16.4, so that
loss of
leaves us
balance was 9.
3.6% startled.
Approximately for the startle, yes, visual and auditory.
Okay. Thank you. That's what it is.
Nothing further, Judge.
All right, thank you, retired special agent. You may stand down. Please watch your step.
Thank you, ma'am.
And you can take your papers with you. Thank you, sir. Any additional objection from the state you want to put on the record?
Judge, again, I'll just say that he's telling us there's a chance. I mean, that's really what it boils down to, and at this point, we're down to a 9.4% chance based on his studies. I feel like, again, that this is more confusing to the jury than it is probative. So we would ask that his testimony be excluded on that basis.
All right, the court makes the following findings of fact and conclusions of law, that this witness, based on his 22 years of experience as a firearms instructor to not only FBI agents and lay people, that he does have sufficient training and experience to discuss how lay people use firearms and how firearms work, simply based on his training and experience, and the fact that he has relied on the 2 studies along with the articles written about those 2 studies are sufficient to make his testimony, expert testimony in these matters. The court does find that it is relevant and therefore will allow retired special agent Moya to testify. All right, we will take a 2-minute break and then bring the jury back in to get at least some testimony on before lunch.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
right
So
there.
make sure they can see everything off.
Yes.
Yeah, no, you're good.
I think you do that too.
Oh, I don't. Yes. Let's see.
Okay, you may be seated. Thank you. All right. Where did Mr. Howard go? Mr. Tadley, if you want to wrangle the jury and get them lined up for us. Thank you.
Sorry about the repeated standing.
You talk a lot louder when you're standing.
Ah, just trying to project my voice.
You are there.
The beard absorbs so much in this.
That's right, I was worried about the sound absorbing qualities of my beer, Judge. I apologize.
No need to apologize. I'll just keep telling you.
I'll write it on a big sticky
Right.
note, sit down, and I'll.
This is the first time you've been doing it, so.
Yeah, you haven't been doing it throughout the rest of
Can you imagine if you had to stand at a podium all day and answer questions? It sure would make everybody's directing across a lot shorter.
Although, I don't know, I've seen some of those federal cases where they'll cross for 3 days and stuff. No, thank you. I don't understand how you see some of these trials, like these civil trials in California, and they're like, oh, this is gonna probably take 3 to 4 months.
Criminal trials do too. I don't understand that.
I don't understand it.
We're waiting.
All right.
You may be seated. Mr. Howard, please call your next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. The defense will recall Jocelyn Rodriguez.
Ms. Rodriguez, you may have a seat, and you are still under oath. Do you understand? Thank you. You may proceed.
Thank you, Judge. Okay. Jocelyn, I'm just going to have a few questions for you, okay?
Yes, sir.
If you don't understand my questions, just let me know, okay?
Yes, sir.
I want to ask you about the birthday party for Octavio in December of 2021, okay?
Yes, sir.
This is the one we've been talking about where you guys went over to Octavio's apartment, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And Sophie was there?
Yes, sir.
Was Sophie ever alone with Jordy during any of that time?
Not to my knowledge.
Did you ever see, did Jordy ever go somewhere where you couldn't see him, but Sophie could? Like if she's alone in a room with him where she can see him and you can't because you're not in that room?
Oh, no.
And now I want to ask you about the New Year's Eve, where you had the group of friends over to your apartment. Do you remember that?
Yes, sir.
Same thing, Sophie came over then, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Was Sophie, same question, was Sophie ever alone in a room where she would have seen Jordy and you wouldn't have?
We were all together.
So you were always in the room, and it's a small apartment, is that fair?
Yes, sir.
And then same thing for the January 22nd get-together, in the early hours, I guess, of January 23rd, when Sophie and Lio arrived about 4 or 5 a.m., arrived about 2 or 3 a.m., is that right?
Yes, sir.
And same question, was Sophie ever alone or where she would have seen Jordy and you couldn't have in that small apartment?
Yes, sir.
Yes, she was, or no, she wasn't?
What was the question again? I'm sorry.
I know. Was Sophie ever alone with Jordy at any one of these 3 times that we're talking about?
No, sir, we were partying together.
Right. Y'all were all together and he and she were never alone.
Not to my knowledge.
And I think you testified yesterday, day before, that you never saw Jordy do cocaine any of these 3 times or any other time. Is that right?
He would go to the restroom, and when the guys would go, he would tell me he wasn't doing cocaine.
Right. And would Sophie go into the restroom with the guys?
No.
The last question I want to ask you is, on January 23rd, it's like 6, 7 a.m. when you go out the front door and you see Octavio, and then you hear the door open and you start to run. Okay, do you know what I'm talking about? I know. This is the last question.
Yes, sir.
You testified previously that you ran and that you heard a gunshot as you were kind of rounding the corner of the building.
Yes, sir.
Did you hear anything else that sticks out in your mind before that gunshot?
I took off running. No.
But before you heard the gunshot, did you hear the racking sound of a gun?
No.
I have no further questions.
Cross-examination.
No questions, Judge.
May this witness be finally excused.
No objection to the defense.
No objection.
Please watch your step. Call your next witness.
The defense will call Santiago Moya.
All right, Mr. Moore, if you would take the witness stand, you are still under oath.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
And Judge, may I approach the well? I left some of my exhibits.
You may.
Thank you.
I've got these ready.
Thank you. Can you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Good morning. My name is Santiago Moya.
And can you please spell your name for the court reporter?
Santiago, S-A-N-T-I-A-G-O, Moya, M-O-Y-A.
And what do you do for a living, sir?
I'm a private investigator and forensic instructor.
And how long have you been a private investigator?
Since 2019, 5 years now.
And you said you were also a firearms instructor. How long have you been a firearms instructor?
I've been a firearms instructor since 2002.
And prior to becoming a private investigator at you said 19?
2019.
Well, what did you do for employment prior to that?
As a special agent, FBI, I work here in Dallas,
And how long did you work with the FBI?
22 and a half years.
So you were a special agent, correct?
Yes,
What else, if anything, did you do as a professional role at the FBI?
besides working as an investigator, FBI investigator, working in Mexican cartels, I was also a firearms instructor.
So you said working with the Mexican cartels. I assume you mean investigating.
I investigated, yes, I worked the Mexican cartels, I investigated Title 21 crimes, especially drugs.
Okay, so in your role as a firearms instructor, I want to back up and talk about, I guess, your education and training that led you to that, okay? Did you receive an undergraduate degree of any type?
Yes, I got a bachelor's of science in business administration and a minor in computer science from Charleston Southern University. That was in 1993 in Charleston, South Carolina.
And when did you join the FBI?
September of 1996.
And so, talk to the jury about the training you received as a special agent at the FBI.
So when you start at the academy, which goes for about 4.5 months, it varies, but 4.5 to 5 months, you are trained in legal matters, you're trained in investigations, you're trained in firearms, defensive tactics, ethics. I'm sure there's a couple other that I can remember right now. That's the main courses.
And is that conducted in one central location?
That's in Quantico, Virginia.
So every hopeful soon-to-be FBI agent goes to Quantico and takes the same academy.
Yes.
And then you describe the courses, and one of those courses includes firearms. What about firearms specifically?
So we're all taught about firearms, we're taught about definitely safety, we're taught about marksmanship, we're taught about they'll teach us about how they work, how the different guns that we're going to be using as FBI agents, how they work, how to disassemble those guns. It's called field stripping, how to clean them.
And so, at the end of that academy, do you take a test? Do you graduate? How does one go from the academy to becoming a special agent?
So you go through the academy, and as I mentioned, you're taking the different classes, and there's a number of tests. And if you, at any time throughout the academy, if you fail any test, then you're going.
And so at the end, I assume, because you became a special agent, you passed all your tests.
Yes, I did.
What happened for you after you finished your initial training at the academy?
So after I finished my initial training at the academy, I was sent to Portland, Oregon. I was there for about 4 years, 4 years and change, working also the Mexican cartels. And after that, in 2000, I was transferred to the Dallas Division, where I continued working violent crimes and Mexican cartels until my retirement in 2019.
So you come to the Dallas Division, so you were a special agent with the Dallas Division of the FBI
Yes.
for almost 20 years. Other than working your special investigation capacity, did you do any other work as an FBI agent in the Dallas Division?
Yes, in 2002, I became a firearms instructor.
How does one become a firearms instructor with the FBI?
Well, first you have to show that you like guns. There's a general knowledge, that's what you like to do. And then, if you're selected, then you go to you take a test. I took it here in Dallas. You take a test, it's mostly firing marksmanship. Once you pass that test, then they will send you to Quantico, Virginia, or some other city where they're actually teaching the class that year. When I did it, it was in Houston. So I went to Houston for about a week, where I was taught about teaching techniques. We were taught about how to work with remedial agents. And there's some agents, believe it or not, that they couldn't pass their qualifications. So we were taught how to deal with those students, how to teach them. We were also taught about safety. We were taught about how to disassemble the guns, and that was more so than what we learned during the academy. We taught about the latest techniques, latest firearms, because we may have changed firearms from the time when I graduated from the academy to whenever I became a firearms instructor. And as a matter of fact, we have changed guns. So you talk about the guns, you talk about the new ammunition that you may be using, all those things are taught during that week.
And so at the end of that week, do you take a test to be able to, you have to pass to become a firearms instructor?
Yes, you have to take a marksmanship test and you have to pass it. There's 3 tries, and if you don't pass it after 3 times, then they fly you back home.
And you, I assume you passed because then you then became a firearms instructor?
Yes, I did.
So, is that the end of your firearms instructor training and education, or do you continue and have to get recertified at any point in the future?
Yes, every 5 years. So as an agent, we qualify 4 times a year. And those qualifications go for about 2 weeks. But obviously you only have to go once. 4 times a year. If you do that every year. Now, as an instructor, I also have to go and re-qualify as an instructor
I'm sorry.
every 5 years.
So, in your capacity as a special agent, you're re-qualifying with firearms 4 times a year, every year for the whole time you're in.
Yes,
And then as a firearms instructor, you're re-qualifying as a firearms instructor, and that happened every 5 years.
yes,
And did that re-qualification involve additional training and education?
yes.
So then now you're a firearms instructor, and what are your duties as a firearms instructor? You talked about all agents have to qualify on their firearms 4 times a year. Are you part of that process?
Yes.
Okay, can you describe kind of what that is and what your work with those agents is?
So when the agents show up at the range for their qualifications, we will qualify them about 25 at a time, every day. And we will teach them we will talk to them about safety. We will do the firearms qualifications, where they have to fire a specific course of fire, and they have to do that. We will also clean guns. We will run some videos. Clean guns will be at the end, but we will run some videos. We'll talk about legal things, legal matters. Definitely videos, if there's any good video there that shows safety protocols broken, we'll show those. And then at the end of the session, you take everybody to the cleaning room, clean all the guns, make sure they're clean, lubricated, and ready to go. Believe it or not, a lot of agents will just put the gun back in the bag and they'll try to leave, but we will make sure that everybody complies and keeps their gun clean and lubricated.
And you said safety is a part of that. Are there, and we're going to talk more about this later, but are there specific protocols that you taught in the FBI about using a gun safely?
Yes, there are some protocols that are pretty much used everywhere. They're taught by every instructor out there. And one of them is going to be keeping your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot. The other one is going to be don't point your gun at anything you don't intend to destroy. Okay? And the third one is going to be treat every gun as loaded. Believe it or not, a lot of people get shot with unloaded guns in the country. So those three are the most important rules. There are others, those are the top three.
And are those things that you're going over with them? Of course, they've already been trained and they've passed, but these are things that you're repeating and going over with them.
Every time.
And then you mentioned going over videos of, if you have a good video of a specific kind of violation of these protocols, like putting your finger on the trigger, et cetera, you would show them and say, this is exactly what we're talking about. Is
There
that?
are videos of that type, there's videos of arrests, there's videos of shoot, no shoot situations, there's videos of, whatever it is that we are trying to teach during that session.
And you were, I think you said this earlier, but just to clarify, were you a firearms instructor from the time you began consistently until the time you retired in 2019?
Yes.
And when, in your time with the FBI, were you trained on just one weapon or a number of different weapons?
So as agents, we carry an assortment of weapons. When I first started, we were using 6-hour pistols, Remington 870 shotguns, MP5 submachine guns. And then later on, as time went by, guns changed for one reason or another. We went to Glocks, so I was trained with the Glock pistol also. We still had the Remington 870 shotguns, the MP5s. Then we started to get the AR-15s. I was trained with AR-15s, and I became an AR-15 instructor also.
And did the agents use any Smith & Wesson firearms?
So what happened is that before the 6-hour pistols were given to us, we used to have Smith & Wesson's 1076 pistols. That didn't go well, and they got removed from the inventory, but they did leave some of those. And we could still carry them if we wanted. I carried Smith & Wesson for a while. They got rid of them because they were too heavy.
Okay.
I didn't like them.
When you said that didn't go well, it was an issue of how heavy the weapon was and its use in.
Yeah, the gun was too heavy. A lot of people, it was tough carrying the gun, 2 magazines, handcuffs. It got heavy. Some of the frames were cracking in some of the guns. So in the end, it wasn't a bad idea. So we got rid of those, and then we went to the 6-hour pistols.
May I approach the witness, Judge?
You may.
I'm showing you what has been previously marked as defense exhibit number 1. Do you recognize that?
Yes,
What is that?
this is my CV resume.
And does it, like any resume or CV, go through your work experience, including what we've been talking about?
Yes, it is.
I'm showing you what's marked as defense exhibit number 2. Do you recognize that?
Yes, this is my TCOL firearms instructor.
What is
certification?
Sorry. What is TCOL?
Texas Commission on Law Enforcement.
And what is that?
They administer, they take care of all the training for law enforcement personnel in Texas.
So any law enforcement personnel in the state of Texas goes through TCOL.
And for
Showing you defense number 3. Do you recognize that?
yes, also from TCOL, this is my police instructor certification.
Defense 4. Do you recognize that?
Yes, this is my, it's given by DPS. This is my Texas license to carry instructor certification.
Texas DPS being Texas Department of Public Safety.
Yes,
Showing you defense exhibit 5. Do you recognize that?
that's a copy of my retired credentials from the FBI.
Showing you what's marked as defense exhibit 6. Do you recognize that?
Yes, this is going to be, this is going to be a surveillance and counter-surveillance certification.
Was that put on by?
That's put on by FBI.
Yes.
Yes.
And Defense 7?
This is a certification from OGS for personal protection officers.
What is OGS?
OGS is Overwatch Global Services.
And what are they?
They basically provide training. The main instructor is a retired State Department instructor, and they put classes for other personnel to do personal protection type work. So a lot of retired agents have taken classes from them.
Defense Exhibit 8, what is that?
This is my FBI, this is FBI instructor school certification. This is an instructor, so this is gonna be for police instructor.
And Defense Exhibit 9, what is that?
This is a, so I was a part-time hostage negotiator also.
With
and
the,
with the FBI. We wear a number of hats in the FBI at the same time, so that's the reason for that.
that's common for.
Yes, it is.
And Defense 10, what is that?
Firearms instructor school also from the FBI.
And Defense 11.
So this is my M4 AR-15 instructor school certification.
This time I will offer Defense 1 through 11 for all, for record purposes, I guess for all purposes.
No objection, Judge.
All right, defense exhibits 1 through 11, the CV and all the certifications are admitted for all purposes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so we kind of implied this with some of the certifications. After you leave the FBI, do you continue to work as a firearms instructor?
Yes.
And for whom and yeah, I guess for whom?
Yeah, so the first 2 years or so, I was teaching at a place called Texas Handgun Academy, and there I provided classes in general shooting, but also to security guards. Those were level 3 security guards, which is armed security guards. So we provided the training and the qualifications and requalifications for those individuals.
Okay. And one of the certificates that we went through was the Texas Department of Public Safety. How were you involved with them?
Yes, I got my certification as a licensed to carry instructor, and I also gave classes and lessons for civilians to get their license to carry here in Texas.
And so we've taught, you've trained law enforcement officers, security guards, non-officers, but more than a civilian, and then civilians.
Yes.
How many law enforcement officers would you say you have given firearms training to in your career?
Thousands.
How many non-law enforcement officer civilians would you say you've given training to?
Hundreds.
And I guess I said training, firearms training, is that
Yes.
right? And then, besides your decades of experience in law enforcement, do you keep current? Do you study the literature in the various policing journals and firearms kind of community when it comes to safety and the issues of like involuntary discharge?
Yes.
I would like to talk to you in general about when you're teaching firearm safety, whether it's to civilians or law enforcement, okay? Are there generally accepted rules that are taught to everybody?
Yes.
What are those?
Well, the top three are gonna be keeping your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot. Second one, not necessarily in that order, but it's gonna be don't point your gun at anything you don't intend to destroy. And the third one is gonna be to keep to always think of your gun as being loaded. Always consider it loaded.
Other than the general concept of safety, why is it so important to keep the finger off the trigger unless you intend to shoot?
To avoid accidents, to avoid people getting shot.
Is it common or uncommon? What is the general consensus within the firearms community about accidental or unintentional or involuntary discharge of a firearm? Is it something that's rare, common, very common?
It happens more than we like. It happens to civilians, and it happens to trained law enforcement personnel.
In your experience as a firearms instructor, is it counterintuitive? Is it difficult for people to get that they have to keep the finger off the trigger?
It is. I have a prop plastic gun. If you would allow me, I'd like to demonstrate.
Sure. Judge, may I approach the witness?
You may. Retired special agent, this is not an actual weapon.
This is not an actual weapon.
Okay.
These are, one is plastic. The other one operates like a real gun. It's not. When I came here this morning, I had one of the deputies actually double check to ensure that, to verify that the programs. These are not real guns.
Are there any bullets in
There
there?
are no bullets.
All right, thank you. You may proceed.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay, so this is a plastic gun. This one does not operate at all. But we're talking about keeping the finger off the trigger, and this is what it means. When you keep your finger here off the trigger, if you're startled for whatever reason, if you fall, if there's a loud noise, if whatever happens, if you tense and you close your fist, it's going to still keep the finger off the trigger. If you maintain your finger here, and you see this, unfortunately, in a lot of movies, you see everybody with their finger here on the trigger. This is very dangerous because if you're startled for whatever reason, there's a loud boom, if you will. If you're at the range and there's somebody next to you firing a gun and that scares you, if you trip and you fall, whatever the case may be, then there's a good chance that if you close your fists, then you may discharge the weapon when you did not intend to do so.
And the jury has heard about the term trigger guard. Can you show the jury, for those who are not familiar with firearms, where on that prop the trigger guard is?
Yes, this is the trigger guard right here. It guards the trigger. You will see a lot of people putting their finger here, thinking that, hey, it's not on the trigger, so I'm okay. Well, not really, because again, if one of the loud noise, the tripping, if anything happens and you're startled and you close your fists, then you can still press the trigger by accident. So what is recommended, what is taught by every instructor in the country is to keep the finger off the trigger right here until you're ready to shoot.
We've talked about guns going off, involuntarily. Is that a subject that is discussed, studied in the firearms community?
Yes, it is. May I put this away?
Absolutely. When we talk about involuntary discharge, is that just the result of someone being careless or horsing around or clowning with a gun?
No, at all.
Okay, can you tell the jury what you mean?
No, it's not a result of people playing around. It happens it happens to law enforcement personnel. all the time. It happens during law enforcement operations, it happens during training, it happens when they're cleaning their guns. It can happen anytime to anybody.
And so, how does that happen if, for instance, in the law enforcement community, where you've got, let's say, FBI agents that are being trained and then requalified 4 times a year, and they're hearing from someone like you, keep your finger off the trigger, keep your finger off the trigger, 4 times a year for years and years, how is it that that still happens?
It still happens because there are physiological responses to noises, to tripping, to what's called sympathetic motions of your hands that will happen to any human being, will happen to anybody. So it is through training that you learn to counter to a great degree, but not necessarily 100%, you learn to counter those responses.
In your experience as a firearms instructor, both with law enforcement and with civilians, is it a problem for people, even when they know to keep their finger off the trigger, that they sometimes put their finger on the trigger or on the guard or inside the guard?
Yes, it happens, yes.
Is that something that's been studied in the scientific community?
Yes, it has.
Tell the jury about that.
So there, pretty much everything started with a professor in Noka out of the Colorado, University of Colorado, back in the early 90s, and he's been around until the 2000s, and he conducted some studies in regards to body responses to outside stimuli, if you will. And some of those factors were, one, startle response. So if you're scared, if you're startled, if something goes boom, and you get scared enough, if you have a gun in your hand and you have your finger on the trigger, then there is a chance that you may discharge that weapon even though you didn't mean to. The other one is loss of balance. They also found out that if you lose balance, you tend to make a fist, and if that happens and you have a gun in your hand and your finger on the trigger, then you may discharge the weapon. And the other one is sympathetic responses. They found out that if one hand was, a sympathetic response is one hand mirroring what the other hand does. And so if one hand was, in the case of a police officer searching somebody with a gun in her hand, both hands are now doing the same thing. They kind of mirror each other. Then the weapon in her hand actually was discharged. So that's why you don't want to have your finger on the trigger when you're doing whatever it is that you're doing.
And are all 3 of these common causes of involuntary or accidental discharge, are they muscle contractions that the person is willfully causing, or are they involuntary?
They're involuntary.
So it's not like someone is thinking, I'm losing my balance, I should close my fists. That's happening the way if a doctor takes one of those little hammers and hits my knee, I get an involuntary reaction.
That is correct.
And the same for the startle response and for the sympathetic.
Yes, they're involuntary.
Are you saying that when I lose my balance, I'm going to contract my hands, and if I have a gun in my hand, it's going to go off every time?
No,
And same thing for startle and for sympathetic?
correct.
Okay.
It may happen.
So kind of back to my question about law enforcement, if they're trained to keep their finger off the trigger, how does this still happen? If they know to keep their finger off the trigger, are they putting their finger on the trigger without realizing it, or are they admitting that I disregarded my training?
No, it just happens. There's been experiments out there where the police officers, if I may bring up one experiment that was conducted in Germany in the early 90s. What they did is that they took 34 police officers, they put them through 12, 13 scenarios, high stress scenarios, and they were given a pistol with sensors. And after they went through through all these scenarios, they asked the police officers, have you put your finger on the trigger? And all of them said, no, 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 I haven't done it. But the truth is that 20% of them actually did put the finger on the trigger at one point or another. There was a parallel experiment also going on where they found out that 20.4% of the police officers not only had put their finger on the trigger, but they had actually pressed the trigger with enough force to actually discharge the gun.
And so that was the second study that was then kind of confirming
Yes.
the initial result and then adding the, but wait a minute, are they just touching it or are they actually involuntarily pulling enough force that it would go off?
That is correct. The first one was, did they put the finger on the trigger like they're not supposed to? The second one was, okay, you put the finger on the trigger, now how much force did you actually put on that trigger? And it was enough force that would have discharged the gun had it been a real gun.
So you mentioned earlier that this is a known problem and a big problem. And by big, I don't mean that it's happening every day to every officer or anything like that. But have there been any studies, like for instance about federal law enforcement officers, about how often accidental, unintentional, involuntary discharge happens?
Yes, ma'am. So I've got some notes here, but this one I actually know real well. Department of Justice, back in the early 2000s, they actually reviewed some shooting events. There were shooting events from FBI, ATF, DEA, and the Marshals. There were 267 shootings during that time. It was a 2-year period. 267 shootings. Out of those 267 shootings, there were 88 shootings that were unintentional. And then there were 14 that were also unintentional during law enforcement operations. The 88 shootings that took place that were not law enforcement operations were during gun cleaning or out at the range. That's 88 shootings.
So we had, so are these just shootings that they know about, or are federal agents required to document every time they discharge their weapon?
They're supposed to document every time. If you're going to do training, obviously you don't do that. But if there's a unintended shooting, it has to be reported. And obviously, any law enforcement type shooting has to be reported to.
So then they split of the 267, they said, okay, these were discharged during operations and, you know, they fired at a suspect, that these were intentional. And then they had another number that was during law enforcement operations but unintentional. And then the same thing during non-law enforcement operations like cleaning, et cetera, those are unintentional, et cetera.
Correct.
And you said that a total of 102, when you add up all the various unintentional discharges, 102 out of 267 were unintentional discharges?
Yes, 38%.
So this is a big problem, it sounds like.
Yes.
And this is, you said the study by the professor in Inoka?
Okay.
That was in the 90s?
Through the 2000s.
And then the DOJ, the FBI is studying, or the DOJ, because all law enforcement is studying and realizing this is really a big problem. Is that right?
Yes. That one went from 2000 to 2003, early 2000s.
I'd like to talk to you about these specific causes, okay? You mentioned 3, right? You mentioned an involuntary muscle contraction when one loses their balance, right?
Yes.
You mentioned an involuntary muscle contraction when someone is startled.
Yes.
And an involuntary muscle contraction when somebody, like what you call sympathetic, where someone is making a motion, a contraction with one hand, and the other hand involuntarily mimics or mirrors.
That is correct.
Mr. Howard, if you could please mark your spot. It is now 12:29. It is time for lunch. So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, please remember your instructions. You cannot discuss any of the testimony with each other or anyone else. I do see that some of you are taking notes. I just want to make sure that you're not sharing those with any other juror. And I expect you back in the jury room no later than 1:30 p.m. We are at recess.
All right.
Can I see the attorney real quick?
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Boyd, you are excused until 1:30.
Thank you, ma'am.
You want us around the corner or?
Yes. Where I'm having difficulty. Because you're going with, they're inconsistent.
So I prepared a memo on this.
Okay.
The CCA has repeatedly said that although they are inconsistent, because of the burden and the presumption of innocence, that if they've been raised as possibilities that the defense is entitled to both instructions, if the court finds they've been raised.
Yes, you are.
So,
Yes, true.
so I have a memo on that. That
My issue is not whether both have been raised. My issue is, I think you usually say, my issue is whether it's provoking the defense.
okay. So not to look much whether or not he and all that, but whether he.
Yeah, because you can't lose and then confront the patient.
Well, I think in that issue, whether it gets offered or whether it gets included is an issue of whether it's been raised by the evidence, whether or not it is provoked, whether or not he provoked it is a fact issue for the jury. So I think the jury can absolutely decide that while he did fear he provoked it, and that it would be right to then say that, self-defense doesn't apply.
All right, so you would be, what is my self-defense? Oh, it's back there. So you'd be okay with the addition of the veto for self-defense?
Absolutely.
All right.
And no one ever uses my proposed instructions or the jury charges based on Texas pattern of jury charge book.
I'll be happy to look at anything you have, because I'm gonna work on it.
I
Do you
will,
have them with you?
yes, and I have copies for everybody, so I'll give both sides copies. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Madam Roach, Stella brought down Jason Crow. I've got him all signed up and everything. If you'd like for me to come back Monday?
Is he getting out?
He should be, yes.
He's got.
You know what, to be honest with you, Judge, he's got enough time on the probation violations, but he doesn't have enough time on the new case, so he won't be getting out. Dealer's choice. If you would like me to bring him Monday, I can.
He's here, we can go ahead and.
Yes, thank you. May I have the fingerprint cards?
Today.
May I have the fingerprint cards? The top three? Thank you, ma'am.
Let me just make sure that Marissa's still around.
Live stream.
How you doing?
Judge, you have to wait on me then? Okay, fingerprint?
I'm sorry?
You have to go ahead and wait on you?
Yeah, we can do it after the vote. If you're okay with that. He's in jail.
I just gave these to the state. I included the verdict form because I'm an optimist, not guilty first and then guilty. But because I'm a realist, I also included guilty. They're otherwise.
I have my own.
Okay. Oh, yeah, yeah, no, yeah. Thank you, Judge.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm still a line down today, so.